Let's start today with Uncancelled in Western Australia. This is actually a segment about a big win for religious freedom, and it turned on its head in the moments before I came into the studio because it wasn't a win until we got a letter from the WA state government which told us that we were uncancelled from using their state government-run, taxpayer-funded venues for the Truth of It live tour in WA, and we were invited to reinstate our bookings. All of that occurred in the period of just 1 week. Awesome win, and that was because of people power. That's you, so thank you to every single person, and there was a lot of you who took action, who did the patch-through calls, who sent the emails and so forth. A lot of work in the media, and that was a great opportunity, and also fantastic legal advice from the Human Rights Law Alliance, who I must give a shout out to and say thank you to as well. Now, as I said, I heard about this just a few moments ago, so the segment has changed, but I want to run through what happened nonetheless. I want to run through the old policy because the WA government has said that they haven't apologised, they haven't said that it was wrong, they haven't done anything like that. They've just said they're going to draft a new policy. And some of the comments that came out from Minister Templeman this afternoon give me some concern that that new policy might just be a more sophisticated version of the one that they used to have, or that it might still contain some significant problems. So let's go through and hopefully find out what these problems are and keep up a little bit of pressure to make sure the policy is properly drafted. So what happened? Well, we were told that we couldn't hire venues in WA, particularly the Albany Entertainment Centre, and I want to be clear, it's not the Entertainment Centre's fault, it's the government's fault, so don't go after them, but particularly that centre because our views do not align with the views of the government of Western Australia, and that is no joke. And we discovered this when we tried to book our venues over there after a very successful tour in Queensland with The Truth of It Live, where more than 7,000 people showed up. And we went back to them and we assumed that they might have got it wrong. So we said, could we have a copy of the policy upon which you are relying to make the decision? And we eventually received a copy of that policy from the Officer of Minister David Templeman and member for Mandurah. The policy was last modified on the very day that we received it. So who really knows what it said on the day before we received it? It was conveniently fixed up or changed in some way, but we'll take it as it was. And this is what it said. It said the Perth Theatre Trust, which is the statutory body owned by the government, which owns these venues and runs them, the Perth Theatre Trust may not enter into an agreement to hire a venue, 1, to an individual or organisations identifying with countries whose political status is unclear or in dispute. In other words, Taiwan or Tibet, but we'll get to that. 2, to an individual or organisations with any other politically motivated objectives. 3, if the keynote or lead speaker are known to hold views that seek to create, promote or increase animosity towards or harassment of a particular group or a person as a member of that group. Or 4, to political parties for the purpose of electioneering or fundraising. Or 5, where the content of the event, and this is the clanger, where the content of the event does not represent the views of the West Australian government or the vast majority of Western Australians. Now, we have been rejected before, not often, it's rare, but it has happened, and we've just got on with our lives. And indeed, we initially did with the Perth issue, because there was another venue we could go to. But this policy was different. It needed to be challenged because it is by a government. It relates to taxpayer-funded venues. These are not small private companies. These are not venues that ought to be ideologically incompatible. It's not the classroom at an Islamic school or the lecture theatre at the Pride Centre. This is the government. This is taxpayer-funded. This is where Christians' money goes as well. And here are the issues. First, the policy said, well, if you don't have our views, you're cancelled. And that is pure authoritarianism. Without disagreement, you would never change the government. You would never have a reason to vote. There would be no democracy. There would be one party, one view, and that is all. And that's wrong, because it means truth officially becomes subject to the official narrative of the government. No second narrative is permitted. No speaking outside of what the government says is permitted. The government gets this demigod-like status to decide, and no one can undermine. That is why there is a legal doctrine in our Constitution called the implied freedom of political communication. It means this: no government, federal, state or local, may create laws or regulations which inappropriately restrict freedom of political communication. That is the freedom that voters have in a democratic society to share political opinions and communications. In other words, this ain't a one-party state. This is a democracy, and the law says so. And the courts actually said that that right was in the Constitution because it was a constitution for a democracy, and you can't have a democracy any other way. But in addition, there's another law that's against them, the Equal Opportunity Act of Western Australia, 1984. It says this: it is unlawful for a person who, whether for payment or not, provides goods or services or makes facilities available to discriminate against another person on the grounds of the other person's religious or political conviction. There you have it. And guess what? Person includes government bodies like the Perth Theatre Trust, so they are bound. That's the problem with that part of the policy. What about the next part of the policy? It says where the content of the event does not represent the views of the vast majority of Western Australians. Well, what are the views of the vast majority of Western Australians? Who decides? How is it measured? The truth is, in most cases, it can't be measured. Indeed, last I checked, the vast majority, that is society at large, whether in Western Australia or any other Australian state, agreed on very little. The last few days have shown me that the vast majority seem to oppose, for example, this very policy. The truth is, the public is composed of a wide range of identity groups, cultural groups and faith groups and more besides, and the public agree on very little, and the government shouldn't get to decide what they do agree on in any event. Agreement is not a valid ground to cancel anyone's views in a real, diverse community. What about the third limb of this policy? Not to hire to political parties for the purposes of electioneering and fundraising, or to individuals or organisations with any other politically motivated objectives. Well, fact check false. Labor MP Peter Watson hosted a farewell and a Christmas concert for constituents at the Albany Entertainment Centre. Labor MP Rebecca Stevens held a fundraiser there just before the March state election. The Labor Party's campaign launch was held in March at the state-owned Perth Arena. It's just not correct. So you can't use these venues to win an election and then just lock everybody else out. Not only is that just outrageous behaviour, it's probably illegal. But what about this? If the keynote or lead speaker are known to hold views that seek to create, promote or increase animosity towards or harassment of a particular group or a person as a member of that group. Do you know there's a problem here? Everyone invokes this rule, and in fact I got it in the media continually when we were talking about this, based purely on what they perceive your views to be and who they perceive you to be. Because you have traditional biblical views, therefore this must be you. And they never quote to you anything you actually said. They never point anything out to you that you actually did. They just say, oh, well, because you're that kind of person, that must be you. So, for example, if you believe that becoming a transgender person is not God's design for a person, that's somehow meant to mean you are somebody who promotes animosity or harassment. When in truth, there's no connection between those two things. Those are two different things. Holding an opinion is one thing. Animosity towards someone, harassing someone, is a completely different thing. Animosity and harassment are things that stems from people's motives. If you hate a person or a group, then you're likely to go there. You will harass them. You'll have animus towards them. You'll do things you shouldn't towards them. But if you merely disagree and bear no ill will whatsoever to any other individual who disagrees, then there's no connection whatsoever with animosity or harassment. And yet they say that difference is animosity. Disagreement is harassment. Well, it ain't. But it's convenient to say that, because it is yet another way to cancel everyone who disagrees with them. And look how crazy this is in practice. Activists started registering dummy bookings at our WA events very quickly in order to take away seats to ensure that the venues were half empty. They've also said that they're coming to protest in a very big way. Several have tried to get access to the events themselves, probably to disrupt, we can only imagine, and they are celebrating our cancellation. My question is, where is the animosity? Where is the harassment? I would never dream of harassing them like that. Our supporters would never dream of doing those things, and we would never, ever instruct it. We would discourage it. I will, however, disagree with people. I will, however, promote truth and the views of Scripture and the goodness of those things. But the day that disagreement becomes harassment is the day that we lose democracy, we lose debate, and we go back to the problem I mentioned earlier: one party rule, one set of opinions for all. Speaking of one-party rule, I got thinking about this a little bit, and this feeds into the last point of that policy. How is it that we got to a point where government officials think it's a good idea to ban anyone who disagrees with them from a taxpayer-funded venue? What was the instinct inside the mind of the official that wrote that, or the minister that signed it off? How does their approach become so akin to an authoritarian regime like the Chinese Communist Party, where you can expect, under those conditions, for dissent to be cancelled and deplatformed? That's what they do. It's not what we do, supposedly, until now. Hold on to your hats, because this gets a bit worse. Remember this part of the policy: cannot hire to an individual or organisation identifying with countries whose political status is unclear or in dispute. You might ask, well, why on earth is that there? I joked to some staff when I read this that basically they've excluded two groups, the ACL and Taiwan. Although I could have added Tibet as well. And that's kind of funny and kind of not, because Taiwan is exactly who they have in mind here. In 2020, the WA government and the Minister for the Arts, David Templeman, issued a formal apology to the Chinese Communist Party for allowing a Taiwanese dance act to use the WA State Theatre. They then banned Taiwanese groups, which is what that policy basically says, from using government-owned facilities. So nobody who disagrees with us, and no thank you Taiwan, no thank you Tibet. Also, by the way, any government which is fighting for its liberty, like these, who are their status is in dispute by tyrannical powers like China, are in the same boat. What is it with WA and indeed Victoria and the Chinese Communist Party? Because the CCP could well be the Nazi regime of the 21st century. And I know when you say that, straight away you're seen as a nutter invoking anything that happened in the 40s in Germany. But already they have literally got mass concentration camps. And literally they are a threat to world peace, and they are authoritarians, and they've got all the trappings of real disaster. And shockingly, I have discovered in this job that the CCP have their sympathisers squarely embedded in so many places in this country, including in positions of influence and influential institutions. For just one example, when I criticise the regime, I do tend to get a few influential people reaching out to me who I've met around the traps in recent years to talk me down. And they all say the same thing: it reads like a script. And I'm very concerned that some of those who sympathise with an evil, murderous regime, which is a threat to the world, are in influential places in our governments. Nothing could be stronger proof of moral bankruptcy than simply not seeing the problem with a regime like the CCP, and not only passing policies that have the trappings of authoritarianism, but also deplatforming countries that are fighting for freedom against authoritarian, murderous, evil regimes. You wonder why they champion policies that crush dissenting views, kill children in the womb, kill the weak and elderly, sterilise our young people, sexually corrupt children, and undermine the social fabric of our democracy with Marxist activist movements. Wonder no more. Now, you may think that's harsh, given that they back down, but time will tell. Minister Templeman's public statement this evening, at the time of recording, clearly indicates that they would like to find a way to keep people like us out in the future. Hopefully, this is food for thought. Hey guys, make sure you click like to like the video, or hit the subscribe button down here and click on the bell so you don't miss any notifications. And to watch more videos, just click here. Cheers. Go on, click one. You know you want to.